second, maybe third time seeing the film, and a few different things strike me. It sort of, for me, it starts kind of somewhat nostalgic as I see these pictures of the 70s, because I sort of married into the Soviet family, and so some of those photos of camping and at the beach in sort of the great Brezhnev era, almost evoke some pleasant nostalgia, and then there's this stark, just gruesome, fearful image of this 11-year-old boy on the roof eating weeds in famine-stricken Ukraine, millions dead. Or, Paul, you mentioned this, the legacy of Stalin and sort of glorification of him now in certain quarters, and even perhaps most disturbingly among some youth, which I guess runs a little counterintuitive to those who thought that somehow the internet or the iPhone or whatever it may be would somehow bring morality. But I guess what to me is even more disturbing, that moment in the film when I guess Shatrovka, when he confronts the nurse. It's two Russians staring each other in the face and looking completely past each other. And just that's to me more disturbing. That it's more insidious, it's hidden. It's this idea of this nurse doesn't even understand what he's talking about. She can't understand the depth of pain. The notion that he's looking at essentially the killer of his brother, who is a neighbor, who is free and na volyu, as the Russians say, right, walking around. And again, David, your commentary in the end about how are these people held to account, what is appropriate. I remember my own confusion up in Arctic Russia. I spent some time in Vorkuta and Ukhta, which was essentially a big prison camp. And I asked questions again to people like that nurse, and we couldn't even. It was like certain people understood, and there were the people in town who were happy to tell about the rehabilitation and share the files and the relatives, and then there were other people who, I don't know. And I guess for me it's confusing, and perhaps David, this is my question to you: is the truth is available in Russia, and it is in the 1930s. And yet it isn't, in some areas it isn't very good, and in some areas you can even attempt to draw certain moral comparisons. I think to the 1999 apartment bombings, which many and serious people believe were orchestrated by the regime, the pretext to start the Second Chechen War, the rise of Putin, the underpinnings of the modern Russian state, which was most recently our reset partner, though I guess we don't use the term. We seem to have stuck to the policy. Largely. We're talking there about deliberate murder of hundreds of Russians in their sleep. And I'm not prepared to say it happened that way. But I know there are very serious people who examine the evidence, and the fact that it remains a big open question. That approaches something of sort of the morality of the 1930s and the willingness to commit such crimes. And I guess, again, not to ramble, my question is, why wasn't this the truth that is out there if you look for it? You can find books and you can read these things, and almost has it lost its value? Why wasn't it the cleansing wave that washed everything away and made everything anew? Is there any?
Yeah. Well, first of all, because it was partial, and it was basically used. The truth in Russia was used for political purposes. In the late 80s, people were fascinated by history and anxious to learn the truth about history when it could be used as a weapon against the old regime, which was the communist regime. Once that regime fell, independent interest in commemorating the victims or investigating the past almost disappeared. In the late 1980s, there were pedestals and plinths established all over Russia, in Russian cities, saying on this site there will be a memorial to the victims of Stalinism, the victims of communism. Now there's nothing left, just the pedestals, just the plinths. The memorials were never built. As far as the apartment bombings, are concerned, I'm one of those who, as you may or may not know, who has argued that in fact, and I believe the evidence in reality is overwhelming, that this is the means, it was through an act of terror that Putin came to power. And it's not the only act of terror. What about the decision to open fire with heavy weapons on the children who were the hostages in Beslan in 2004, or the decision to pump a theater with 1,000 hostages full of lethal gas without making any effort really to prepare to rescue the victims. And it all stems from the same thing, that the individual just doesn't count for anything. And he is particularly insignificant compared to the goals of the regime. So therefore, if it's necessary, of course we are not dealing with a situation such as that which existed in 1937, which nearly 1 million people were shot straight out, and another, well, 700,000 and then another equal were shot, and roughly the same number were arrested and sent to labor camps where they quickly died. It's not quite that scale, but the situation could, given that mentality, become very bad in the future. Right now, the regime is not seriously threatened, but as the situation deteriorates, given that mentality, anything is possible.
Thank you, and I certainly don't mean to draw a direct comparison to the sheer numbers of murder victims of the 1930s. I guess to me, though, to avoid sort of the danger of proportionalism, the notion that the person who kills 1,000 is that person much worse than the person who's prepared to kill 100, or the person who's prepared, certainly in terms of the sheer human suffering that's visit non-people, it's greater. But the willingness to cross those lines, the willingness to, again, the person is not important enough. It can be sacrificed for these other goals. I mentioned just how, again, and it's on great display here today in the film, just how deep David gets on Russia. And when I'm not reading David's work, or maybe Leon Aron's work, I often find my way into our own Librarian of Congress, Jim Billington himself, a renowned Russia historian and scholar. I just brought along his book from, I don't know, maybe it's already about a decade ago, Russia in Search of Itself. And this passage comes to mind. I'll read it in the transcript, and sort of as perhaps an appropriate way to end. Maybe a dark note with this film, and Nekrasov's words on what it says for today. It's sort of no easy answer, but Billington's talking here about denial, monuments, and this part of history. The only part, and he says, and I quote, the only part that has been fully acknowledged and honored by public monuments is the suffering caused by foreign foes. Yet just as much suffering was inflicted on them by themselves, and over a longer period of time. This condition of denial impacts on a society in ways that can never be understood, let alone remedied by roundtable discussions, even those that may someday be convened after all the mass graves and buried documents have been unearthed. Words alone will never provide a roadmap into a happy future for those who once thought they stood on a mountain. They now know there is no easy way out of their valley, and that the shadow of massive innocent death still hangs over it. End quote. I just thought those were beautiful words and capture the difficulty of sort of this moment and sort of where the Russian people find themselves, and how to deal with this messy, ugly, confusing, and yet not fully known past. And so I guess we've added yet another roundtable discussion, as it were, to this this attempt. And it is 5 o'clock, and everybody even after. So I think I'll close things up. I do want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank particularly Jackie Kahan, who helped me put this together with David. And would also suggest to all of you, keep an eye on our website. We have other interesting events coming up. We'll probably take a little bit of break in August, as is customary up here on the Hill, but should have a robust program in the fall, particularly on Russia. I hope we'll finally have a serious Russia hearing, and as well other briefings. One we have planned is sort of a survey, sort of long view of U.S.-Russian relations over a period of 2 centuries, and something that be an interesting perspective on Capitol Hill to look at the hills and valleys and understand what we've seen before and where we've been before in this important relationship with Russia. With that, I will close the record and thank you all for coming.